Ambassador Kira adjusted her biosuit's environmental controls as she stepped aboard the human research station Meridian. Her forearms moved with practiced efficiency, two manipulating data tablets while the others gestured in unconscious communication. Patterns her species had evolved over millennia. The station's artificial gravity felt strange beneath her digitigrade legs, lighter than her homeworld's crushing atmosphere. "Welcome aboard, Ambassador," came a warm voice from behind her. She turned, compound eyes focusing on the human approaching her. Tall, with sandy hair and intelligent green eyes, he moved with the peculiar bipedal grace she'd studied in preparation for this assignment. "Dr. Jake Morrison," he continued, extending one hand in the human greeting ritual. "Project Director for the Joint Xenobiology Initiative." Kira studied his face, noting the micro-expressions that conveyed openness and curiosity rather than the fear or disgust she'd encountered from some species. "Ambassador Kira Thess Ninth Harmony," she replied, carefully wrapping two of her smaller hands around his in the appropriate response. "I look forward to our collaboration." The formal introductions complete, Jake led her through the station's corridors. Kira's attention split between his explanation of their research objectives and her observations of human behavior. Crew members they passed exhibited fascinating variations in posture, expression, and movement. Such diversity within a single species was remarkable, compared to her own people's synchronized harmony. "Your quarters are adjacent to the observation deck," Jake explained, palming open a door. "We thought you'd appreciate the view of the nebula." The room was spacious by station standards, with modifications for her physiology, but what caught her attention was the transparency of the human living spaces. Through the corridor, she could see into other quarters where off-duty crew members moved about their personal routines. "Do humans not value privacy?" she asked, genuine curiosity coloring her synthesized voice. Jake laughed, a sound that sent an unexpected flutter through her thoracic cavity. "We do, actually. Privacy settings are controlled by the occupants. Most people just don't bother when they're alone." As if summoned by their conversation, a crew member in the opposite quarters began removing his uniform jacket. Kira found herself watching, fascinated by the ritual of changing from work attire to casual clothing. The human's movements were unself-conscious, efficient, yet somehow vulnerable in their simplicity. "The changing of protective coverings," she murmured. "Is this a purification ritual?" "More like comfort," Jake replied, following her gaze. His cheeks flushed slightly, another intriguing human response. "We wear different clothes for different activities. Work, sleep, exercise. It helps us mentally transition between roles." Kira nodded, filing this information away. Her own biosuit was a permanent extension of herself, necessary for survival in alien atmospheres. The idea of voluntarily removing protective barriers was both foreign and oddly appealing. "I should let you settle in," Jake said, moving toward the door. "The research team briefing is at 800 tomorrow. Will that work with your circadian requirements?" "My species requires minimal rest periods," Kira replied. "I will be ready." As Jake left, Kira activated her quarters systems and began reviewing her mission parameters. She was here to evaluate human scientific methods, determine their suitability for expanded cooperation, and report back to the Collective Council. A straightforward diplomatic assignment. Yet as she worked, her attention kept drifting to the transparent walls and the humans moving beyond them. Their casual intimacy with vulnerability intrigued her. In her culture, exposure meant weakness, but these humans seemed to find strength in their openness. When the crew member across the corridor changed clothes again, this time into sleep attire, Kira found herself watching with scientific interest. The human's unself-conscious confidence in his own skin spoke to something deeper than mere comfort. It suggested a security in individual identity that her collective-minded species had never experienced. She dimmed her quarters lights and settled into her rest position, but sleep remained elusive. Tomorrow would bring new observations, new puzzles to solve about these remarkable creatures who had somehow learned to be strong while remaining wonderfully, vulnerably human. 3 days into her assignment, Kira found herself developing what she could only describe as an obsession. The morning briefings with Jake's research team were productive. Their xenobiology work was impressive, their methodologies sound. But it was the human behaviors between meetings that captivated her. From her workstation in the command center, she had access to the station's internal monitoring systems. Originally intended for security purposes, she'd discovered they provided an unprecedented window into human social dynamics. She told herself it was anthropological research, necessary for her diplomatic assessment. Jake, in particular, had become her primary subject of study. She watched him through the security feeds as he moved through his daily routines with fascinating unpredictability. Unlike her people's synchronized collective consciousness, every human seemed to operate on their own internal rhythm. This morning she observed him in his quarters, preparing for the day. He stood before a mirror, running his hands through his hair, occasionally frowning at his reflection. The intimacy of the moment struck her, not the physical act itself, but the vulnerability of self-examination, the human need to present themselves to the world in a particular way. When he began removing his sleep clothes, Kira's attention sharpened. She'd observed this ritual dozens of times across the crew, but with Jake, she found herself noting details she'd previously overlooked. The way he stretched, working tension from his shoulders, the unconscious confidence with which he moved, the contrast between his professional demeanor and this private, unguarded self. Fascinating species, aren't we? Kira's four hands jerked, simultaneously, nearly dropping her datapad. Jake stood behind her, coffee mug in hand, wearing that enigmatic human expression she'd learned indicated amusement. "Dr. Morrison?" she managed, her voice synthesizer crackling with static from her surprised emotional state. "I was reviewing security protocols. At 05:30, while watching me get dressed?" His tone remained light, but she detected something sharper underneath. That's an interesting approach to protocol review. Heat flooded Kira's exoskeleton, an involuntary stress response that turned her natural brown coloration slightly orange. In her culture, being caught in deception was a profound shame. "I was conducting behavioral observation for my diplomatic assessment." Jake set down his coffee and moved closer, not threatening but definitely focused. "Kira, I need you to understand something about human culture. Privacy isn't just a preference, it's a fundamental right. Watching someone without their knowledge, especially in intimate moments, violates that right." Intimate? The concept confused her. "You were merely changing protective coverings. In my species, we share all experiences through the collective. Individual privacy is foreign." Jake's expression shifted, anger giving way to curiosity. "Your entire species shares experiences? Like a hive mind?" "Not precisely." Kira's smaller hands gestured while her primary arms remained still, a sign of emotional agitation. "We maintain individual consciousness but share sensory input, emotional states, significant thoughts. True privacy exists only in death." The revelation seemed to impact Jake profoundly. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those remarkably expressive human eyes. "That must make this assignment incredibly isolating for you." The unexpected, empathy caught Kira off guard. She'd prepared for anger, disgust, even fear, but not understanding. Yes. The silence in my mind is uncomfortable." "So you've been watching us to feel less alone?" Jake asked quietly. Kira considered lying, maintaining diplomatic protocols, but something in his tone invited honesty. "Initially, yes, but it became more than that. Human behavior is endlessly fascinating. Your species maintains such diversity while still functioning as cohesive groups. You're individuals first, collective second. It's the opposite of everything I've known." Jake sat on the edge of her workstation, bringing himself to her eye level. "And you've been particularly interested in watching me." The direct statement made her thoracic cavity flutter again. "You exhibit behaviors I find puzzling. Your morning routine shows self-doubt, yet you display confidence in professional settings. You change your appearance multiple times daily, suggesting either vanity or insecurity. Yet you seem comfortable with yourself. I cannot reconcile these contradictions. That's because you're looking for logic and emotion, Jake said with a smile that made something warm spread through her nervous system. Humans are contradictory creatures. We doubt ourselves and love ourselves simultaneously. We're vulnerable and strong, selfish and selfless, often within the same moment. How do you function with such internal conflict? We embrace the chaos, Jake laughed. It's what makes us creative, adaptable, passionate. Our contradictions aren't flaws, they're features. Kira studied his face, noting the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way his entire expression transformed with emotion. I want to understand, she said quietly. But I also apologize for violating your privacy. In attempting to comprehend your species, I failed to respect your individual autonomy. Jake reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and gently touched one of her smaller hands with his fingertips. The contact sent electrical sensations up her arm, her species' equivalent of human tactile pleasure. Apology accepted, but I have a proposition. Instead of watching me through security feeds, why don't you just ask? I'll show you what human privacy means, and maybe you can help me understand what it's like to share consciousness with an entire species. Kira looked down at their joined hands, alien and human, so different yet somehow compatible. For the first time since arriving on the station, the silence in her mind felt less like isolation and more like potential. I would like that very much, Jake Morrison. As she spoke his name, she realized she'd stopped thinking of him as merely a research subject. The implications of that shift both thrilled and terrified her. The proximity alarm's shrill wail shattered the quiet efficiency of the night shift. Kira's compound eyes snapped open in her quarters as the station's lights shifted to emergency red. Her biosuit's internal systems immediately began analyzing atmospheric conditions, detecting the subtle pressure changes that indicated a hull breach somewhere on the station. She arrived at the command center simultaneously with Jake, who looked remarkably alert for someone who'd been sleeping moments before. His hair was disheveled, and he wore the casual clothes she'd learned he preferred for sleep, but his eyes held the sharp focus she'd come to associate with crisis management. Report, Jake commanded, sliding into the command station with practiced ease. Explosion in Laboratory Section C, Chief Torres called out, her fingers dancing across control interfaces. Looks like the experimental fusion reactor had a cascade failure. We've got fires, atmosphere loss, and the containment field is fluctuating. Kira's four hands moved to her own console, accessing the station's schematics. The breach is expanding, she announced, her synthesized voice cutting through the controlled chaos. At current rate of expansion, we have 17 minutes before the breach reaches the main habitat ring. Jake's jaw tightened. Evacuation? Impossible, Torres replied grimly. The transport that brought Ambassador Kira is our only functional ship, and it can't hold the entire crew. Besides, if we lose containment completely, the explosion will destroy any ship within 2 kilometers. Kira studied the readouts, her mind racing through calculations and possibilities. In her species' collective consciousness, problems like this were solved through the combined processing power of thousands of minds. Here, she had only her own intellect and whatever collaboration these remarkable humans could achieve. There's a solution, she said quietly, but it requires someone to enter the contaminated zone and manually realign the containment field generators. The radiation levels would be fatal to humans within minutes. Jake turned to her, understanding already dawning in his eyes. But not to you. My biosuit can handle radiation exposure your species cannot survive, Kira confirmed. However, I lack the technical knowledge to perform the realignment. I would need guidance. I'll talk you through it, Jake said immediately. The communication system won't function in that environment, Torres interjected. Too much interference from the containment field fluctuations. Jake stood, determination settling over his features like armor. Then I go with her. Jake, no, Torres protested. The radiation will kill me slowly, Jake finished. Emphasis on slowly. If Kira's biosuit can provide any protection at all, we might have enough time. He turned to Kira, and she saw something in his eyes that made her thoracic cavity constrict. Trust. Complete, absolute trust. Can your suit extend protection to another person? Kira's mind raced through her biosuit's capabilities. Limited protection, yes. I can create a localized atmosphere bubble, but it would require close physical contact to maintain the seal. How close? Jake asked. Extremely close. We would need to be pressed together. For the duration of the repair. The implications hung in the air between them. Kira had observed human discomfort with involuntary intimacy, their cultural taboos around unwanted contact. She prepared for him to refuse, to choose death over the violation of his personal boundaries. Instead, Jake stepped toward her. Then that's what we do. 20 minutes later, they stood at the entrance to the contaminated section. Kira had modified her biosuit's external configuration, creating a flexible extension that could envelope a human torso. Jake wore emergency gear over his casual clothes, but both of them knew it was largely symbolic protection. Remember, Jake said, his voice slightly muffled by the emergency mask. The key is to synchronize all three generators simultaneously. If even one falls out of phase, the containment field collapses entirely. Kira finished. I understand. Jake moved closer and Kira activated her suit's extension. The biosynthetic material flowed around him like liquid, forming a second skin that pressed him firmly against her thorax. She could feel his heartbeat through the suit's sensory network, rapid but steady. His breathing was controlled despite the stress. The intimacy was overwhelming. In her species, physical contact was rare and functional. This was something entirely different. Two separate beings choosing to trust each other completely, sharing not just space but survival itself. They entered the contaminated zone together, moving as one entity. Kira's legs handled navigation, while Jake's hands worked the controls, guided by instruments only he could read. The radiation levels climbed steadily, but her suit held, protecting both of them in its environmental bubble. First generator, Jake murmured, his breath warm against her neck through the suit's interface. Adjust the phase variance to 3.7 terahertz. Kira's smaller hands worked the controls while her primary arms maintained their embrace. She could feel Jake's muscle tension, the way he fought to stay conscious as radiation sickness began to affect him despite her protection. Talk to me, she said as they moved to the second generator. Tell me something about yourself I couldn't learn from observation. Jake's laugh was weak but genuine. Right now, I'm terrified. Not of dying, of failing, of not being able to save my crew. In my culture, individual fear is shared, diluted among the collective. You carry this burden alone? We all do. It's part of being human. Jake's hands shook slightly as he worked the second control panel. But sometimes we choose not to be alone. The second generator synchronized. One more to go. Why did you trust me? Kira asked as they approached the final generator. Jake was growing heavier against her, his body beginning to fail despite her protection. Because, Jake whispered, his words barely audible through the suit's interface, you could have watched me change clothes for months without saying anything. But you apologized. You recognized my personhood even when you didn't understand it. That's not something you learn from collective consciousness. That's individual choice, individual morality. Kira felt something warm and unfamiliar spread through her nervous system as Jake's hands found the final controls. Not just the electrical pleasure of physical contact, but something deeper, something that had no equivalent in her species' shared emotional vocabulary. Final generator synchronized, Jake breathed, and the containment field stabilized with a harmonic hum that vibrated through both their bodies. They made it back to the command center before Jake collapsed. As medical personnel rushed to treat his radiation exposure, Kira knelt beside him, her hands, all four of them, gently touching his face. You saved us, he whispered, his eyes struggling to focus on her. We saved each other, Kira replied, and realized she was speaking a truth that would change everything. In that contaminated chamber, pressed together in desperate intimacy, she had experienced something her species had never known: the choice to be vulnerable with another, to trust completely, not because it was programmed into her nature, but because she wanted to. As Jake slipped into unconsciousness, Kira remained by his side, understanding finally what humans meant when they spoke of individual connection. She had felt it, not shared through collective consciousness, but chosen, personal, unique, and she never wanted to lose it. Jake's recovery took 6 days. Kira spent most of that time in the medical bay, ostensibly reviewing diplomatic reports but actually watching him sleep. Dr. Chen, the station's chief medical officer, had assured her that the radiation exposure was manageable, but humans seemed so fragile compared to her own species' resilient biology. "You don't have to stay," Jake said on the afternoon of his 3rd day, his voice still weak but warm with something that made Kira's biosuit readings spike. "I am ensuring the continued health of a valuable diplomatic contact," she replied formally. Though they both knew it was a lie, Jake's laugh turned into a cough. "Is that what I am? A diplomatic contact?" Kira's smaller hands fidgeted with her datapad while her primary arms remained still. A gesture Jake had learned indicated emotional uncertainty. "I am unsure of the appropriate human terminology." "What would you call me in your language?" "We have no equivalent concept," Kira admitted. "In the collective, relationships are predetermined by biological and social functions. What exists between us has no precedent in my species' experience." Jake reached out, his movement slow but deliberate. Kira met him halfway, letting his fingers intertwine with one of her smaller hands. The contact sent familiar electrical warmth up her arm, but now she recognized it for what it was: not mere physical sensation, but emotional connection. "The human term," Jake said quietly, "would be falling in love." The words hit Kira like a containment field failure, sudden and overwhelming. Love. She'd studied the concept in human literature and cultural records, but experiencing it was entirely different. The warm pressure in her thoracic cavity, the way her attention fixated on Jake's welfare above all other considerations, the protective instinct that had driven her to risk everything to save him. Was this what humans called
love?
"Is that what this is?" she asked, her voice synthesizer barely above a whisper. "For me, yes," Jake said, his thumb gently stroking her chitinous knuckle. "I know we're different species, that there are probably regulations and protocols against this kind of relationship. But in that contaminated chamber pressed against you, sharing breath and heartbeat, I've never felt more connected to another being in my life." Kira's biosuit registered an incoming communication from her homeworld. Priority diplomatic channel. She ignored it. "My superiors have been attempting to contact me," she said instead. "I have been avoiding their calls." "Because of this? Us? Because I know what they will demand." Kira's compound eyes couldn't produce tears, but her voice synthesizer crackled with emotion. "Physical relationships between species are considered contamination in our culture. I will be ordered to terminate this assignment and submit to consciousness cleansing." Jake's grip on her hand tightened. "Consciousness cleansing?" "They will remove the memories and emotions that compromise my objectivity. I will return to the collective unchanged, as if this experience never occurred." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. Finally, Jake spoke. "What do you want, Kira? Not what the collective wants, not what diplomatic protocol demands. What do you want?" Kira stared at their joined hands, alien and human, so different yet somehow perfect together. "I want to understand what you showed me in that chamber. The choice to be vulnerable, to trust, to feel connection that isn't programmed or mandated but freely given. I want to learn what it means to be individual while still choosing to share that individuality with another." "Then stay," Jake said simply. "Don't answer their calls. Be here with me and let me show you what humans call love." That night, after Jake fell asleep, Kira made her choice. She disabled her long-range communicator and purged the priority messages unread. Whatever consequences awaited, she would face them later. For now, she wanted to exist in this impossible space between species, between duty and desire, between collective programming and individual choice. Jake was released from medical care the next morning. Instead of returning to his quarters, he went to Kira's. She was waiting, having spent the night in contemplation of her decision. "I have chosen," she announced as the door sealed behind him. "Chosen what?" "To explore this connection between us, despite the consequences, to learn what it means to love and be loved as an individual, rather than a component of collective consciousness." Jake crossed the room slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When he reached her, he raised his hands to cup what humans might call her face, the smooth, chitinous surface where her compound eyes were set. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I don't want you to sacrifice everything for something you might regret." "In my species," Kira said, all four of her hands coming up to cover his, "regret is shared among the collective, diluted until it becomes meaningless. But joy, when truly experienced, is also diluted. I want to know what it means to feel both, completely individually as my own choice." Jake leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. The gesture was purely human, but Kira found it profoundly intimate. The willing vulnerability of bringing one's most vital sensory organs into contact with another. "Then let me show you," he whispered. Their first kiss was awkward, a collision of anatomies that had never evolved for such contact. But Jake's patience and Kira's adaptability found ways to bridge the gap between species. Her biosuit's tactile sensors translated his touch into cascades of sensation she'd never experienced. When his lips found the sensitive spots along her neck where her exoskeleton joined, she made sounds her voice synthesizer had never been programmed to produce. They spent hours exploring each other's bodies with scientific curiosity and growing passion. Jake marveled at the way her chitinous plates could shift and adjust, creating new contours and sensitivities. Kira discovered that human skin was endlessly responsive, that touch could communicate emotions more complex than any verbal language. When they finally joined together, her biosuit adapting to accommodate their anatomical differences, Kira experienced something that shattered every assumption she'd held about existence. This wasn't the shared pleasure of collective consciousness, distributed and safe. This was raw, individual, overwhelming joy that belonged to her alone, chosen and claimed and treasured for its uniqueness. Afterward, they lay together in the modified sleeping alcove Jake had helped her design, her four arms wrapped around him while he traced patterns on her thoracic plating. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "I understand now why humans fight so hard to preserve their individuality," Kira replied. "What we just shared could never exist in collective consciousness. It required two separate beings choosing to become temporarily joined, to share themselves while remaining themselves. And the consequences?" Kira's biosuit registered another incoming priority message, more urgent than before. Soon, her people would send ships to retrieve her. Soon she would have to choose between the love she'd discovered and the only life she'd ever known. "Whatever comes," she said, pulling Jake closer. "This moment, this choice, this love, it's mine. For the first time in my existence, something belongs to me alone, and that makes it infinitely precious." Jake pressed a kiss to what he'd learned was the equivalent of her collarbone. "Not yours alone," he murmured. "Ours." The distinction felt revolutionary. Not collective property, but shared by choice between two individuals. As Kira drifted toward sleep, she held that word like a treasure. Ours. Outside her quarters, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small revolution occurring aboard one tiny station. But for two beings who had found love across the vast difference between species, the universe had suddenly become a much more intimate place. The collective ships arrived 3 days later, sleek biomechanical constructs that dwarfed the human research station. Kira watched them through the observation deck's viewports, Jake's hand warm in two of hers, and felt her new understanding of individual fear crystallize into something sharp and immediate. "Impressive vessels," Jake observed, his scientist's curiosity warring with obvious concern. "How many crew?" "They are not crewed in the human sense," Kira replied, her voice synthesizer unusually steady given the chaos in her thoughts. Each ship is a single entity, grown rather than built, with the pilots integrated into the vessel's biological systems. They are extensions of the collective's will. And they're here for you. Yes. Kira's compound eyes tracked the ship's positioning, a perfect formation that spoke of unified consciousness. I estimate I have perhaps an hour before they demand my immediate return. Jake's grip tightened. What exactly will they do to you? Consciousness cleansing is not painful, Kira said, trying to sound reassuring. They will simply isolate the neural pathways associated with individual experience and dissolve them back into collective memory. I will retain my knowledge and skills, but the emotions, the personal connections, the sense of self I've developed here, those will be erased. That's not cleaning, Jake said fiercely. That's murder. They're killing who you've become. The concept struck Kira with unexpected force. In developing individual consciousness, she had essentially become a new person. Not just Kira Thess Ninth Harmony, fungible component of the collective, but Kira, unique individual capable of love and choice and regret. To erase that would, indeed, be a form of murder. I will not submit willingly, she decided aloud, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Then we fight, Jake said immediately. We? Kira turned to study his face, noting the determined set of his jaw, the protective fire in his eyes. You think I'm going to let them take you without a fight? That I'm going to stand by while they erase the woman I love? Jake's hands cupped her face with gentle possessiveness. We'll contact Earth, call in the fleet. Make this a diplomatic incident if we have to. Before Kira could respond, the station's communication system activated. The voice that emerged was eerily similar to her own, but flatter, devoid of the individual inflections she'd developed. Kira Thess Ninth Harmony. You will report to Docking Bay 7 for immediate extraction and remediation. Your contamination poses a threat to collective stability. Jake stepped protectively in front of her, an absurdly gallant gesture given that the beings addressing them were currently in space. This is Dr. Jake Morrison, Project Director for the Joint Xenobiology Initiative. Ambassador Kira is under human protection as a diplomatic representative. Any action taken against her will be considered an act of war. The pause was brief but telling. Dr. Morrison, your emotional contamination of our representative was anticipated. You will accompany Kira Thess Ninth Harmony for questioning and potential remediation. Kira felt something cold and sharp pierce her thoracic cavity. They cannot remediate humans, she said quickly. The process would destroy your neural architecture entirely. Jake's face went pale, but his voice remained steady. Then I guess we'd better not let them catch us. The next few hours blurred together in desperate activity. Jake contacted Earth Command, requesting immediate military assistance. The skeleton crew of the research station worked frantically to strengthen defensive systems never designed for combat. And Kira found herself in the unprecedented position of actively opposing her own people. They're not negotiating, Commander Torres reported grimly. Our defensive grid is holding for now, but those bioships are adapting. They're literally evolving countermeasures in real time. Kira studied the tactical displays, her unique knowledge of collective capabilities proving invaluable. They will not destroy the station while I remain aboard, she said, but they will eventually find a way to extract me. The collective is patient and implacable. Then we need to change the game, Jake said. He was at his most dangerous when, thinking clearly under pressure, Kira had learned. What if we made this about more than just you? Explain. Jake activated the station's communication array, setting it to broadcast on all frequencies, not just to the collective ships, but to Earth, to the various allied species monitoring the situation, to anyone who might be listening. This is Dr. Jake Morrison of Research Station Meridian, he announced, his voice carrying the authority of absolute conviction. We are currently under threat by the collective for the crime of love. Ambassador Kira has committed no violation of our agreements, no breach of diplomatic protocol. Her only transgression was developing individual consciousness and choosing to share that consciousness with another being. Kira watched, fascinated, as Jake weaponized human values against alien logic. The being I love was born into a society that sees individual thought as contamination, Jake continued. But individual consciousness isn't a disease. It's the foundation of creativity, of growth, of everything that makes existence worthwhile. If the collective can erase individual consciousness from one of their own for the crime of love, what does that say about their commitment to peaceful coexistence with species that prize individuality above all else? The response from the collective ships was immediate and harsh. Dr. Morrison, you do not understand the nature of collective consciousness. Individual deviation threatens the stability of our entire species. Kirath's ninth harmony must be remediated for the good of all. For the good of all, Jake repeated, his voice heavy with irony. That's what every oppressive regime says when they want to crush something beautiful and unique. But here's what I think. I think you're not trying to save Kira from contamination. I think you're afraid of what she represents. Explain. Jake looked at Kira, and she saw something in his eyes that made her understand why humans had conquered fear and built civilizations among the stars. She represents evolution, Jake said firmly. Not contamination, growth. Kira has become something new, something that bridges the gap between collective consciousness and individual experience. She's proof that your species doesn't have to choose between unity and diversity. She could teach you how to maintain collective strength while celebrating individual creativity. You speak of impossibilities, the collective voice replied. But Kira detected something new in the tone, uncertainty. Do I? Jake challenged. Kira, tell them what you've learned. Kira stepped forward, all four hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. My consciousness remains linked to the collective through quantum entanglement, she announced, activating her biosuit's deep-range transmitters. I have not lost our connection. I have enhanced it. Through individual experience, I have gained new perspectives, new solutions, new ways of understanding the universe that collective consciousness alone could never achieve. The silence from the ship stretched long enough that Kira wondered if she had miscalculated. Then a new voice emerged from the communications array, older, more complex, carrying the weight of the entire collective's attention. Explain these. New perspectives, Kirath's ninth harmony. Kira felt Jake's hand slip into one of hers, anchoring her courage. Love, she said simply. The choice to prioritize another's welfare above your own, not because you are programmed to do so, but because you decide to. This creates bonds stronger than biological imperatives. Observe, Dr. Morrison risks his life and his species' diplomatic relationship for my sake, gaining nothing but personal satisfaction. Yet this irrational behavior has motivated innovations that saved this entire station. Continue. Individual, creativity paired with collective knowledge produces exponential advancement. Kira pressed on, her voice growing stronger. Humans achieve remarkable progress because they combine personal inspiration with shared learning. They maintain both unity and diversity simultaneously. I have experienced this hybrid consciousness, and I believe our species could benefit from exploring such integration. The debate that followed played out across quantum frequencies, the entire collective engaging in rapid-fire discussion that would have been impossible for individual minds to follow. Kira found herself at the center of a civilization-wide philosophical crisis, her personal choice to love having become a catalyst for species-wide evolution. Hours passed. The human fleet arrived, taking defensive positions around the research station. Other allied species sent observer ships, drawn by the implications of the standoff. What had begun as a personal conflict between lovers had become an interstellar incident with the potential to reshape how conscious species related to each other. Finally, the collective spoke again. We propose an experiment, the ancient voice announced. Kirath's ninth harmony will remain in her current state, maintaining both individual consciousness and collective connection. She will serve as a bridge between our species and others who prioritize individuality. Her experiences will be studied, her innovations examined, her emotional development monitored. Kira's thoracic cavity constricted with hope and terror in equal measure. And If the experiment fails, then we will have learned something valuable about the limits of consciousness, the collective replied, with what might have been alien humor. And you will have had the opportunity to explore love fully before returning to us. Jake stepped closer, his arm sliding around Kira's waist in a gesture of possession and protection. What about us? Our relationship? Dr. Morrison, the voice said, and Kira detected something almost like approval in the tone. Your willingness to challenge an entire civilization for love demonstrates the kind of innovative thinking our species requires. You will be welcome to participate in this experiment as Kira's partner. The word carried implications that sent warm electricity through Kira's nervous system. Official recognition of their bond, sanctioned by both their peoples, protected by interstellar law. There is one condition, the collective added. This relationship must produce tangible benefits for both species. Love alone is insufficient. You must demonstrate that individual consciousness enhances rather than threatens collective stability. Jake grinned, that peculiarly human expression of confident mischief that had first caught Kira's attention. That's what scientists do best, he said. We prove impossible things are actually inevitable. Over the following weeks, as the various fleets dispersed and normal operations resumed, Kira and Jake began the delicate work of documenting their relationship's benefits. Their joint research proposals combined collective processing power with human intuitive leaps, producing breakthrough discoveries in quantum consciousness and interspecies communication. But it was the smaller moments that truly proved their point. The way Jake's individual creativity sparked new ideas in Kira's collective linked mind. The way her species' vast shared knowledge enhanced his research in ways no human team could match. The way their love, personal, chosen, unique, motivated them both to achievements neither could have reached alone. Standing together on the observation deck one evening, watching the nebula paint the stars in impossible colors, Kira reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Klein, you regret it? Jake asked, echoing the question from their first intimate night. Choosing individuality, choosing me, choosing to challenge everything you were raised to believe? Kira considered the question seriously, as she always did with Jake's inquiries. Her life had become infinitely more complex, filled with uncertainty and risk and the constant possibility of loss. But it had also become infinitely more meaningful. I regret nothing, she said finally, all four of her hands finding different ways to touch him. One stroking his hair, another holding his hand, the third and fourth wrapped around his waist. In choosing love, I chose to become fully alive. And in choosing you, I chose to prove that consciousness is not a zero-sum game. We can be individuals and still be connected. We can be different and still be united. Jake turned in her arms, pressing his forehead against hers in the gesture that had become their most intimate form of contact. So, what happens now? Now, Kira said, her voice synthesizer warm with contentment and anticipation. We continue the experiment. We love each other. We learn from each other. And we prove to the universe that the best relationships aren't about losing yourself in another person. They're about becoming more yourself because someone else chooses to see and cherish who you really are. As the stars wheeled overhead, two beings from different worlds held each other close and marveled at the impossible beauty of chosen love. Behind them, the research station hummed with the work of dozens of species learning to cooperate, to communicate, to bridge the vast differences between conscious minds. And in the quantum depths of space, the collective consciousness pulsed with new possibilities, forever changed by one individual's decision to love and be loved in return. The experiment would continue, but its success was already evident in the simple fact that love had proven stronger than the fear of change. The universe was vast and strange and filled with wonders beyond imagination. But sometimes, the greatest wonder was simply two beings choosing to share that vastness together, one moment at a time.